K9, dog barks at retired cop's cane. What he found hidden in the handle triggered an internal investigation. What happened next will shock you beyond belief. The story you're about to listen to involves secrets that stayed buried for over 2 decades, a retired cop's desperate attempt to hide the truth, and a canine dog whose nose uncovered more than anyone bargained for. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the faded brick walls of Millbrook Police Station, as retired Officer Sam Mitchell walked slowly up the concrete steps. His weathered hands gripped his wooden cane tighter than usual, the familiar weight of it providing comfort he desperately needed. Today marked exactly 25 years since he first put on the badge, and the department was throwing a small ceremony to honor their veteran officers. Sam had mixed feelings about returning to this place. The walls held too many memories, too many secrets he'd rather leave buried. But the invitation came directly from Chief Martinez, and refusing would have raised questions he wasn't ready to answer. So, here he was, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing his best suit that still fit reasonably well despite the years. The lobby buzzed with familiar faces and new ones. Young officers who looked barely old enough to drive stood next to seasoned veterans whose eyes carried the same weight Sam felt in his own chest. Children from the local elementary school had been invited to meet the heroes who protected their community, their excited chatter filling the normally quiet space. "Sam Mitchell, as I live and breathe." Officer Jenny Cross approached with a warm smile, her patrol uniform crisp and professional. She was one of the good ones, Sam knew, the kind of cop who joined for the right reasons and stayed true to those principles. "How have you been keeping yourself busy in retirement?" "Oh, Sam replied, his voice carrying a slight rasp from years of smoking he'd given up too late. "Garden's keeping me occupied. Got myself a greenhouse last spring. Tomatoes are coming in real nice." Jenny laughed. "Never pictured you as the gardening type. You always seemed more like the fishing and beer kind of retiree." Sam forced a chuckle, but his eyes kept scanning the room. Old habits died hard, and something felt off. Maybe it was just nerves about being back in uniform territory, or maybe it was the weight of what he carried, both physically and emotionally. Near the corner of the lobby, a large German shepherd lay quietly on a thick mat, his handler sitting beside him, reading a magazine. The dog's name tag read Buster, and his vest indicated he was part of the Canine Narcotics Unit. Semi-retired, according to the sign next to his bed, but still sharp as a tack when it came to sniffing out trouble. "That's Buster," Jenny followed Sam's gaze. "He's Officer Maria Santos's partner. Been with the force for 8 years now. Still works a few cases when we need the extra nose, but mostly he just comes in for community events like this. Kids love him." Sam nodded, but something cold settled in his stomach. He'd always been uncomfortable around police dogs, especially the narcotics ones. They saw too much, smelled too much, knew too much. He shifted his weight, leaning more heavily on his cane. The ceremony began with Chief Martinez calling everyone to gather in the main conference room. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, with a small podium at the front, decorated with department photos and commendations. Sam found a seat in the back, preferring to keep his distance from the crowd and closer to the exit. "Today we honor those who've served our community with distinction," Chief Martinez began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned his position through decades of hard work. "These men and women have given years of their lives to keep our streets safe, our families protected, and our community strong." As the chief spoke, Sam's mind wandered to his early days on the force. He'd been idealistic then, believing he could make a real difference, and for a while, he had. He'd helped solve cases, caught real criminals, made the streets safer. But somewhere along the way, things got complicated. The lines between right and wrong started to blur, and choices that seemed necessary at the time began to haunt him. The applause brought him back to the present as his name was called. Sam rose slowly, his cane clicking against the linoleum floor as he made his way to the front. The weight of it seemed heavier today, more significant somehow. He accepted his plaque with a nod and a few words of thanks, trying to ignore the way his hands trembled slightly. As he turned to return to his seat, something unexpected happened. Buster, who had been lying quietly throughout the ceremony, suddenly lifted his head. His ears perked up, and his nostrils flared as he caught a scent that made every instinct he possessed come alive. The dog's reaction was subtle at first, a slight tension in his posture, a focused intensity in his dark eyes. But as Sam passed closer to where Buster lay, the German Shepherd rose to his feet, his tail rigid and his breathing quickened. Maria Santos, Buster's handler, noticed immediately. She'd worked with him long enough to read every signal, every nuance of his behavior. This wasn't casual interest or friendly curiosity. This was Buster in full detection mode, the same focused alertness he displayed when he had found contraband during a search. "Easy, boy," Maria whispered, placing a calming hand on Buster's back. But the dog wasn't interested in being calmed. His attention was laser-focused on Sam Mitchell, or, more specifically, on the wooden cane Sam carried. Sam felt the dog stare like a weight on his shoulders. He tried to continue walking naturally, to not draw attention to himself, but Buster began to move. The German Shepherd took several steps towards Sam, his nose working overtime, his body language screaming that he had found something significant. "Buster, heel," Maria commanded quietly, not wanting to disrupt the ceremony. But her partner had caught a scent that overrode his training. Years of conditioning told him that this smell meant danger, meant contraband, meant something that needed immediate attention. The first bark came without warning, sharp, insistent, and loud enough to make everyone in the room turn toward the sound. Buster's deep voice echoed off the conference room walls, causing several of the children to jump in surprise, and a few adults to step back instinctively. "What's gotten into him?" someone whispered. Maria's face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, everyone. He's usually much better behaved than this." But Buster wasn't finished. The second bark came even louder, more urgent. He pulled against Maria's grip on his collar, straining toward Sam Mitchell's cane with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor behavior. Sam's blood ran cold. The cane suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his grip. His mouth went dry, and he could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the air conditioning. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now, not after all these years. "Maybe I should take him outside," Maria said to Chief Martinez, who had stopped mid-sentence to address the disruption. "No need," the chief replied, though his eyes were now fixed on the unusual interaction between the dog and the retired officer. "Buster's one of our best. If he's alerting to something, maybe we should pay attention." The room fell silent except for Buster's continued whining and the soft clicking of his claws against the floor as he paced in a small circle, never taking his eyes off Sam's cane. The German Shepherd's nose twitched constantly, processing scents that humans couldn't detect but that told him a story he was trained to recognize. Sam tried to back toward the door, but the movement only intensified Buster's reaction. The dog let out another bark, this one with a different tone, not aggressive but insistent, almost pleading. It was the same sound he made when he had found drugs during a search and wanted his handler to understand the significance of his discovery. "Mr. Mitchell," Chief Martinez said carefully, his voice taking on the professional tone he used during investigations, "is there something about your cane that might be causing Buster's reaction?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had already been fired. Every eye in the room was now focused on Sam, and he could feel the weight of their collective stare. His heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it, and his grip on the cane tightened until his knuckles turned white. I don't know what you mean," Sam stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Years of interrogating suspects had taught him to recognize the signs of deception, and he knew he was displaying every one of them. Buster took another step forward, his nose nearly touching the wooden handle of Sam's cane. The dog's breathing was rapid and shallow, his entire body vibrating with the excitement of a successful detection. He looked up at Maria with the expression she'd seen hundreds of times before, the look that said he had found exactly what he was trained to find. "Chief," Maria said quietly, her training overriding her personal discomfort with the situation, "Buster's showing all the signs of a positive alert for narcotics. I've never seen him react this strongly to a false positive." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and confusion. Several of the veteran officers exchanged glances, their years of experience telling them that something significant was unfolding before their eyes. Sam's mind raced through his options, but they all seemed to lead to the same dark place. He could try to leave, but that would only make things worse. He could continue to deny everything, but Buster's behavior was too specific, too professional to ignore. Or he could come clean about part of the truth and hope it would be enough to avoid exposing the rest. "Look," Sam said, his voice stronger now as he made his decision, There might be some old evidence residue on the cane. You know how it is. 25 years on the force, you handle a lot of different cases. Maybe some of that stuck around. It was a reasonable explanation, the kind that might satisfy most people in most situations. But Chief Martinez wasn't most people, and this wasn't most situations. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct he possessed was telling him that there was more to this story. "I think we should take a closer look," the chief said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Just to be safe, you understand. For everyone's peace of mind." Sam's stomach dropped as he realized there was no way out of this situation that didn't involve revealing at least some of what he'd kept hidden for so long. The cane that had been his constant companion for the past 3 years suddenly felt like a time bomb in his hands, ready to explode and destroy everything he'd worked so hard to protect. Buster continued to pace and whine, his professional training warring with his natural instinct to please his human partners. He knew he'd done his job correctly, had identified the scent he was trained to detect, but the tension in the room was affecting him too. His tail wagged uncertainly, confused by the negative emotions he was sensing from the humans around him. "Please, Chief," Sam said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation he couldn't quite hide. "Can we handle this quietly? There are children here, and I don't want to cause a scene over what's probably nothing." But it was too late for quiet handling. Word was already spreading through the room in whispered conversations and meaningful looks. The veteran officers were beginning to put pieces together, remembering old cases and old rumors that had never quite been resolved. The younger officers were watching and learning, seeing how a routine community event could suddenly turn into something much more serious. Maria kept one hand on Buster's collar and the other on her radio, ready to call for backup if the situation escalated. Her partner's behavior was unmistakable. He'd found contraband, and his training demanded that the appropriate action be taken. She looked to Chief Martinez for guidance, knowing that whatever happened next would have consequences that reached far beyond this single moment. The retired officer stood frozen in the center of the room, his cane clutched in hands that shook with more than just age. Around him, the ceremony that was meant to honor his years of service was transforming into something that might destroy everything he'd built since leaving the force. And in the middle of it all, a German shepherd named Buster continued to alert to secrets that were about to change everyone's understanding of the man they thought they knew. The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken questions and the promise of revelations that no one in that room was prepared to hear. But Buster had known from the moment he caught that familiar scent, that this was just the beginning of a story that would shake the very foundations of everything they thought that they understood about justice, loyalty, and the price of keeping secrets. Chief Martinez stepped forward, his authoritative presence commanding the room's attention. The ceremony that had started as a celebration was now something entirely different. He could feel the shift in energy, the way conversations had stopped, and all eyes had turned toward the unfolding drama between the retired officer and the narcotics dog. "Sam, I need you to hand me the cane," Chief Martinez said, his voice calm but firm. It wasn't a request. It was an order from a superior officer to someone who, despite being retired, still understood the chain of command. Sam's face had gone pale, and beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. His hands trembled as he gripped the wooden handle tighter, as if letting go would mean losing control of everything he'd worked to protect for over 2 decades. "Chief, with all due respect, this is my personal property," Sam replied, trying to inject authority into his voice. "I don't see why a dog having a bad day should give you the right to search my belongings." But Buster wasn't having a bad day. The German shepherd continued to pace in tight circles, his nose working overtime, his tail rigid with the intensity of his alert. Maria Santos had seen this behavior countless times during drug busts, and there was no mistaking what it meant. Her partner had detected something, and his training demanded that the appropriate action be taken. "Sir," Maria interjected respectfully, "Buster has never given a false positive in 8 years of service. His behavior right now is textbook narcotics detection. I have to support his alert." Officer Jenny Cross, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, moved closer to Chief Martinez. She'd worked enough cases to recognize when a situation was about to escalate, and her instincts told her they needed to handle this carefully but decisively. "Chief," she whispered, "maybe we should clear the room of civilians first. If there's something to this, we don't want to create a public spectacle." Martinez nodded and turned to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break in our ceremony. Could I ask all our civilian guests to step out into the lobby for just a few minutes? Officer Davis will escort you and make sure you have refreshments. The room began to empty, parents gathering their children and moving toward the exit with confused murmurs and questioning looks. Several of the veteran officers remained behind, their experience telling them that something significant was happening and their presence might be needed. As the last of the civilians left, the atmosphere in the room became even more tense. Sam found himself surrounded by a semicircle of current and former law enforcement officers, all of whom were beginning to understand that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. "Sam," Chief Martinez said once the room was cleared, "I'm going to ask you one more time to hand over the cane voluntarily. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the official way. Your choice." Sam looked around the room, at faces he'd known for years, people he'd worked alongside, shared coffee with, trusted with his life in dangerous situations. The weight of their collective stare was almost unbearable, but the weight of what might be revealed if he gave up the cane was even worse. "I want a lawyer," Sam said finally, the words coming out hoarse and strained. The request for legal representation changed everything. What had started as an unusual incident was now officially a criminal investigation. Chief Martinez exchanged glances with his senior officers, and the unspoken communication between them was clear. This was no longer about a retired cop and a misbehaving dog. "That's your right," Martinez replied, "but I still need to secure potential evidence. Officer Cross, please call for a warrant to search the cane, and get Detective Reynolds down here immediately." Jenny Cross moved to make the calls while Maria Santos continued to manage Buster, who showed no signs of losing interest in Sam's cane. If anything, the dog's alert behavior was becoming more intense, as if the delay was frustrating his trained instincts to complete his job. "This is insane," Sam muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. 25 years of service, and you're treating me like a common criminal over a dog's reaction to an old piece of wood. But Detective Frank Reynolds, who had just entered the room in response to Jenny's call, wasn't buying the innocent act. Reynolds had spent 15 years working major crimes, and he had developed a sixth sense for when someone was hiding something significant. The retired officer's body language, his defensive posture, and his immediate request for a lawyer all pointed to someone with serious secrets to protect. "Mr. Mitchell," Reynolds said, introducing himself with professional courtesy, "I understand this is an uncomfortable situation, but I'm sure you can appreciate that we have to follow proper procedures when a narcotics dog alerts to potential contraband." Sam laughed bitterly. "Contraband? You think I'm running drugs in my retirement? Do I look like a dealer to you?" "Honestly, sir, dealers come in all shapes and sizes," Reynolds replied calmly. "But that's not necessarily what we're dealing with here. Buster is trained to detect more than just street drugs. He also alerts to certain chemicals, residues, and other substances that might be found in evidence lockers or crime scenes." The mention of evidence lockers made Sam's face twitch almost imperceptibly, but Reynolds caught it. Years of reading suspects had taught him to watch for micro-expressions, the tiny physical tells that revealed when someone's mind had just jumped to something they'd rather keep hidden. "Could be anything," Reynolds said, deliberately keeping his answer vague to see how Sam would react. "Old case materials, seized narcotics, chemical samples, even traces from evidence processing. The question is, why would your personal cane have any of those things on it?" Before Sam could answer, Officer Cross returned with news about the warrant. "Judge Morrison is sending it over electronically. Should have it within the hour." "An hour?" Sam's voice cracked slightly. "You're going to keep me here for an hour over this nonsense?" "Actually," Chief Martinez interjected, "you're free to leave any time you want, but the cane stays here as potential evidence. That's non-negotiable." The choice was simple, but terrible. Sam could leave and return with his lawyer, but doing so would mean abandoning the cane and everything it contained. Or he could stay and try to control the situation, though his options for doing so were rapidly disappearing. "I'll wait," Sam said finally, lowering himself into one of the folding chairs, with movements that suddenly made him look every one of his 68 years. Reynolds pulled up a chair across from Sam, close enough to study his expressions, but far enough away to avoid seeming threatening. He'd conducted thousands of interviews, and he knew that the time before official questioning began was often when suspects were most likely to make revealing statements. "You know," Reynolds said conversationally, "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've learned that most people who get defensive about searches are usually hiding something. But the ones who get really defensive, the ones who lawyer up immediately, they're usually hiding something big." Sam stared at his hands, which were still gripping the cane. His knuckles had gone white from the pressure, and Reynolds noticed that the retired officer's breathing had become shallow and rapid. "I've got nothing to hide," Sam said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then why not just let us take a look?" Reynolds asked reasonably. "If it's just an old cane with maybe some residue from your police work, we'll confirm that and everyone can go home. No harm, no foul." But Sam knew it wasn't that simple. The cane contained more than just residue from old cases. Hidden in its hollow interior were items that would destroy not just his reputation, but potentially his freedom and the carefully constructed life he'd built since retiring from the force. Meanwhile, Buster continued his alert behavior, though Maria had managed to get him to lie down while maintaining his focus on the cane. The German Shepherd's training was so ingrained that he remained in detection mode even while resting, his eyes never leaving the object that had triggered his professional instincts. 8 years, Maria said to no one in particular, and I've never seen him this focused on a single object for this long. Usually once he alerts, he either gets to complete the search or we move on to something else. But he's not losing interest at all. Detective Reynolds looked at the dog with professional interest. He'd worked with canine units many times over the years, and he knew that sustained alert behavior like this usually indicated a significant find. "What's the strongest reaction you've ever seen from him?" Reynolds asked Maria. "Last year we raided a warehouse that was being used to cut and package cocaine," she replied. "Buster found over 50 pounds of pure product hidden in false walls. His behavior then was almost exactly like this. That same intense focus, that unwillingness to back down or lose interest." The comparison sent a chill through the room. If Buster was reacting to Sam's cane the same way he'd reacted to 50 pounds of cocaine, what could possibly be hidden inside it? Sam overheard the conversation and felt his stomach drop even further. He'd hoped that whatever traces of old evidence might be on the cane would register as a minor alert, something that could be explained away as cross-contamination from his years in law enforcement. But if the dog was reacting as if he'd found a major drug cache, the contents of the cane were going to raise questions he definitely couldn't answer. "Mr. Mitchell," Reynolds said, turning his attention back to the retired officer, "I'm curious about something. You mentioned that the cane might have residue from old cases. Can you tell me specifically which cases you're thinking of?" It was a trap, and Sam knew it. If he mentioned specific cases, Reynolds would be able to check the records and potentially find inconsistencies. But if he remained vague, it would make his explanation seem less credible. "Look, detective," Sam said, "over 25 years, I worked hundreds of cases. Narcotics, violent crimes, property theft, you name it. I can't remember every single incident where I might have handled evidence that could leave traces." "Fair enough," Reynolds nodded. "But what about more recent cases? Anything in the last few years that might explain why your cane would set off a narcotics dog today?" Sam's mind raced. He hadn't worked any official cases since retiring 3 years ago, which meant any explanation involving recent police work would be obviously false. But admitting that he'd had no recent contact with official evidence would only make the dog's reaction more suspicious. "I've done some consulting work," Sam said carefully, "helped out on a few cold cases, looked at some old evidence files. Maybe something from that." Reynolds made a note in his pad. "Consulting work for which department?" "Private clients mostly, families of victims, that sort of thing." "I see. And these private clients gave you access to official evidence files?" Sam realized he had just made his story more complicated rather than simpler. Private consultants wouldn't normally have access to physical evidence, especially not narcotics evidence that could contaminate other objects. "No, not physical evidence," Sam backtracked. "Just files, photos, reports. Nothing that would leave residue." "Then we're back to the original question," Reynolds said pleasantly. "What would cause your cane to trigger such a strong reaction from a narcotics dog?" Before Sam could answer, Officer Cross's radio crackled to life. "Base to Unit 23, your warrant has been approved and transmitted. You're clear to proceed with the search." The moment everyone had been waiting for had arrived. Chief Martinez stood and looked directly at Sam. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to place the cane on the table and step back. Sam's hands shook as he slowly lifted the wooden cane. For 3 years, it had been his constant companion, a symbol of his retirement and his new life away from the complexities of police work. But now, it felt like a snake in his hands, ready to strike and poison everything he'd worked to protect. He placed it on the conference table with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the silent room. As soon as the cane left his hands, Buster's alert behavior intensified. The German Shepherd rose to his feet and approached the table, his nose working furiously as he confirmed that the source of the scent was indeed the wooden object now lying before him. Detective Reynolds put on latex gloves and picked up the cane, examining it carefully. The wood was polished and well-maintained, with a brass tip and what appeared to be a decorative brass band around the handle. But as he looked more closely, he noticed that the brass band was actually a joint where the handle could be separated from the shaft. It unscrews, Reynolds observed, showing the separation point to Chief Martinez. Don't, Sam said suddenly, his voice sharp with panic. Please, you don't understand what you're doing. Then explain it to us, Martinez replied. Help us understand. But Sam had gone silent, his face pale and his breathing rapid. He watched helplessly as Detective Reynolds began to turn the brass fitting, loosening the connection between the handle and the shaft of the cane. The handle came free with a soft click, revealing that the interior of the cane was hollow. Reynolds peered inside and saw that the cavity contained several objects wrapped in plastic. His expression grew serious as he carefully began to remove the contents. The first item was a small plastic bag containing what appeared to be a white powdery substance. Reynolds held it up to the light, and even without testing, his experience told him he was looking at some form of narcotic powder. Jesus, Sam, Chief Martinez breathed. What the hell is this? But Reynolds wasn't finished. The second item was a bundle of papers wrapped in plastic, and the third was something that made everyone in the room inhale sharply, a small silver locket on a delicate chain. As Reynolds carefully unwrapped the documents, he could see they were photocopies of official police reports, evidence logs, and what appeared to be surveillance photos. The papers were old, some of them yellowed with age, but they had been carefully preserved in their plastic wrapping. These are case files, Reynolds said, examining the documents more closely. Old case files with evidence logs and crime scene photos. Sam slumped in his chair, all the fight going out of him. The secret he'd guarded for 3 years was now spread across the conference table for everyone to see, and there was no explaining it away. But it was the locket that drew everyone's attention. Maria Santos picked it up carefully, opening it to reveal a small photograph of a young girl with blonde hair and a bright smile. She appeared to be around 5 or 6 years old, with the kind of innocent expression that would break any parent's heart. "Who is this child?" Maria asked, holding the locket so everyone could see the photograph. Sam looked up at the picture, and for a moment, his carefully constructed composure cracked completely. Tears formed in his eyes, and his voice broke when he tried to speak. "Her name was Emma," he whispered. "Emma Chen. She was 6 years old." The past tense wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Detective Reynolds immediately began cross-referencing the name with his mental database of cases, trying to remember if he had ever heard of a missing child named Emma Chen. Chief Martinez asked gently. "What happened to Emma, Sam?" But Sam had withdrawn into himself again, his lawyer training warring with his emotional need to finally tell someone the truth about what had happened all those years ago. He'd carried the weight of Emma's story alone for so long that part of him wanted nothing more than to let it all out. But another part of him knew that every word he said now could be used against him later. "I need to make a phone call," Sam said finally. "I need to call my lawyer." As Sam was escorted to a private room to contact his attorney, the remaining officers gathered around the evidence spread across the conference table. The white powder, the old case files, and the locket with little Emma's picture painted a picture that none of them wanted to believe about their former colleague. Detective Reynolds was already on his phone with the crime lab, arranging for immediate testing of the powder and analysis of the documents. But in his gut, he already knew they were looking at something much bigger than simple drug possession or evidence tampering. Comment below if you think Sam is hiding something even darker than what we've already discovered. While Sam made his phone call to his attorney, Detective Reynolds wasted no time diving into the mysterious contents of the cane. The evidence lab was already on standby, but Reynolds knew that the real answers would come from digging into the department's old case files. The name Emma Chen was nagging at him, stirring memories of something he'd heard before but couldn't quite place. "Maria, can you keep Buster calm while I run these documents through our database?" Reynolds asked, spreading the photocopied papers across the table under better lighting. "Of course," Maria replied, though she was studying the locket with growing concern. "Detective, this little girl, there's something familiar about her face. I think I might have seen this photo before." Reynolds looked up sharply. "Where?" "I'm not sure yet. Maybe in one of the cold case files that get circulated, or possibly on a missing persons bulletin." Maria's voice carried the uncertainty of someone trying to recall a half-remembered detail that felt important. Officer Jenny Cross, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, stepped closer to examine the documents. Her years of administrative work had given her an encyclopedic knowledge of the department's filing systems and case histories. "These evidence logs," she said, pointing to several of the photocopied sheets, "they're from 2001. See the date stamps? And this formatting is from our old computer system, before we upgraded in 2003. Reynolds nodded, making notes. "So, we're looking at evidence that's over 20 years old. The question is, why would Sam Mitchell have copies of these files? And why would he keep them hidden in his cane?" Before anyone could speculate further, Chief Martinez returned from checking on Sam's phone call. His expression was grim, the kind of look that suggested the situation was about to become even more complicated. "Sam's lawyer is driving up from the city," Martinez reported. "Won't be here for at least 2 hours, but that gives us time to do some digging into these documents." Reynolds had already begun entering information from the evidence logs into the department's database. The first search yielded results that made his blood run cold. "Chief, we've got a problem," Reynolds said, his voice tight with concern. "These evidence logs match an unsolved missing persons case from 2001, a 6-year-old girl named Emma Chen who disappeared from Riverside Park on July 15, 2001. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just dealing with drug possession or evidence tampering anymore. They were potentially looking at materials related to a child disappearance case that had never been solved. "Pull the complete file," Martinez ordered. "Everything we have on Emma Chen." As Reynolds worked at his laptop, connecting to the department's archives, Maria continued studying the locket. Something about the little girl's face was definitely familiar, but the memory remained frustratingly just out of reach. "Here it is," Reynolds announced, and the ancient printer in the corner began churning out pages. Case file 2001-07-1947. Emma Chen, age 6, reported missing by her mother, Lisa Chen, on July 15, 2001 at approximately 6:30 p.m. Jenny Cross gathered the printed pages as they emerged, scanning them quickly for key details. "Says here the initial investigating officer was," she paused, checking the signature line, "Detective Samuel Mitchell." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Sam Mitchell hadn't just happened to have evidence from Emma Chen's case. He had been the primary investigator on her disappearance. "This is getting stranger by the minute," Martinez muttered. "Why would the investigating detective keep copies of evidence logs in a hidden compartment?" Reynolds was already pulling up more details from the case file. According to this, Emma Chen was playing at Riverside Park with several other children when she vanished. Multiple witnesses saw her around 4 p.m., but no one could account for her whereabouts after 4:30. Her mother arrived to pick her up at 5:30 and found only the other children. "What was the outcome of the investigation?" Maria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Case went cold after 6 months," Reynolds read from the screen. "No viable leads, no physical evidence, no witnesses to an actual abduction. The file shows it was transferred to the cold case unit in March 2002. But as Reynolds continued reading, he found details that raised even more questions. "Wait a minute, look at this. The case notes show that Detective Mitchell requested to remain involved with the investigation even after it was transferred to cold cases. That's unusual. Normally, when a case gets transferred, the original detective moves on to active investigations." Jenny Cross was studying the photocopied evidence logs more carefully, comparing them to the official file printouts. "These copies aren't complete," she observed. "The photocopies Sam had only show certain pieces of evidence, not the entire chain of custody records." "Which pieces?" Reynolds asked, moving to look over her shoulder. "Mostly items that were collected but never processed for testing," Jenny replied. "Fabric samples, hair fibers, some kind of soil sample from the park. But here's what's weird. According to the official file, these items were supposed to be sent to the state lab for analysis, but there's no record of the results ever coming back. The implications were starting to paint a disturbing picture. Detective Reynolds felt his investigative instincts kicking into high gear as patterns began to emerge from the seemingly random evidence. "Chief, I think we need to contact the state lab and find out what happened to those evidence samples," Reynolds said. "If they were never actually submitted for testing, or if the results were somehow suppressed, we could be looking at investigative misconduct." But Chief Martinez was focused on a different aspect of the case. More importantly, we need to find out what happened to Emma Chen. A missing child case doesn't just disappear from memory. There should be follow-up reports, periodic reviews, something. Maria Santos had been quietly listening to the conversation while keeping one eye on Buster, who remained interested in the evidence but had settled into a calmer state now that the cane had been opened and its contents revealed. Suddenly, a memory clicked into place. "I remember now," she said suddenly, causing everyone to turn toward her. "About 3 years ago, when I first started working with Buster, we were doing a training exercise at Riverside Park. One of the older officers mentioned that a little girl had gone missing there years earlier, and they'd never found her body." "Which officer?" Reynolds asked immediately. "I think it was Officer Davis. He said something about how it was one of those cases that haunted everyone who worked on it, especially the detective who caught the case." Reynolds was already reaching for his phone. "We need to talk to Davis. If there's department folklore about this case, he might know details that aren't in the official files." While Reynolds made the call, Chief Martinez continued examining the physical evidence from Sam's cane. The white powder had been bagged and tagged for laboratory analysis, but the locket with Emma's photograph seemed to hold the most emotional weight. "Maria, you said this photograph looked familiar," Martinez said. "Could you have seen it somewhere other than a missing persons bulletin?" Maria picked up the locket again, studying the little girl's face with the kind of focus she usually reserved for crime scene analysis. "It's possible, but there's something about the way this photo is mounted in the locket that bothers me." "What do you mean?" "Look at the edges," Maria said, holding the locket under the light. "This photo has been trimmed to fit inside the locket, but you can see where it was cut. The original picture was larger." The observation sent a chill through the room. If the photograph had been recently placed in an old locket, it suggested that Sam Mitchell had been actively maintaining some kind of memorial or reminder of Emma Chen's case. Reynolds finished his phone call and rejoined the group. "Officer Davis is on his way in. He says he definitely remembers the Emma Chen case, and he has some theories about what really happened that were never officially documented." "Theories?" Martinez asked. He wouldn't go into details over the phone, but he said there were always rumors that the investigation was compromised somehow, something about evidence going missing and witness statements being altered. The word compromised hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to reveal its true scope. If the Emma Chen investigation had been deliberately sabotaged, and if Sam Mitchell had been involved in that sabotage, the contents of his cane might represent far more than just personal mementos. "Chief," Jenny Cross said suddenly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that Sam Mitchell didn't just work the Emma Chen case. He might have been responsible for covering something up." It was a serious accusation, the kind that could destroy careers and reputations, even if it turned out to be unfounded. But the evidence was beginning to point toward a pattern of deception that went far beyond simple procedural violations. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Martinez cautioned. "We need facts, not speculation, but I want everything about this case pulled and reviewed, every report, every piece of evidence, every witness statement." Reynolds nodded and turned back to his computer. "I'm also going to run Sam Mitchell's name through our internal affairs database. If there were ever any complaints or investigations involving his conduct, we need to know about it." The search yielded results almost immediately, and Reynolds felt his stomach drop as he read the screen. "Chief, we've got multiple hits, 3 separate internal investigations involving Detective Mitchell between 1999 and 2002. "What were the charges?" Martinez asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer would be troubling. "First, one was in 1999, allegation of evidence tampering in a drug case. Charges were dropped when the complainant recanted his statement. Second one was in 2001, the same year as the Emma Chen case, allegations of inappropriate contact with a confidential informant. Again, charges dropped. Third one was in 2002, allegations of filing false reports, and obstruction of justice. All charges dropped, Maria observed. That's either a lot of false accusations or someone with enough influence to make problems disappear. Or someone who was very good at covering his tracks, Reynolds added grimly. Jenny Cross had continued studying the photocopied documents from Sam's cane, and she'd made another disturbing discovery. These evidence logs show items that aren't mentioned in the official case file. Look here, there's a reference to personal effects recovered from secondary location, but there's no record of any secondary location being searched in the official reports. What kind of personal effects? Martinez asked. Doesn't specify. Just says child's belongings, bagged and tagged as evidence items 4752. But when I look at the official evidence list, items 4752 are listed as miscellaneous fabric samples. The discrepancies were mounting, and each new discovery painted a more disturbing picture of what might have happened during the original investigation. If evidence had been mislabeled or hidden, if witness statements had been altered, if secondary crime scenes had been covered up, then Emma Chen's disappearance might not have been the random abduction it appeared to be. Officer Davis arrived while the team was still analyzing the documents, and his presence immediately added another layer of gravity to the investigation. Davis was a 30-year veteran whose reputation for honesty and thoroughness was unquestioned throughout the department. I heard you wanted to talk about the Emma Chen case, Davis said without preamble. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to ask the right questions about that investigation. What do you mean? Reynolds asked. Davis pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, the weight of old secrets evident in his posture. I was a patrol officer back then, just 5 years on the force. I was one of the first responders when the mother called in the missing child report. What did you observe at the scene? Martinez prompted. That's just it. I observed things that never made it into any official report. The mother, Lisa Chen, was hysterical, but she kept saying the same thing over and over. He took her, he took my Bobby. When I asked who he was, she said she'd seen a man in a dark car talking to Emma earlier that day. Reynolds looked up from his notes. There's no mention of a suspect vehicle or a male suspect in any of the reports I've seen. That's because Detective Mitchell told me to leave that part out of my initial report, Davis said, his voice heavy with regret. He said witness statements from hysterical parents were unreliable, and including unsubstantiated suspect descriptions would only muddy the investigation. The revelation hit the room like a bombshell. If a potential suspect description had been deliberately omitted from the official reports, it represented a fundamental violation of investigative protocol. Did you comply with Mitchell's instruction? Martinez asked. Davis nodded reluctantly. I was young, and he was a senior detective. I trusted his judgment, but I never forgot what the mother said, and over the years, I started to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. What else do you remember about that day? Reynolds pressed. Mitchell arrived at the scene within 20 minutes of the initial call, which was fast even for a high-priority case. But when he got there, he immediately took control of the scene and started directing the search in a very specific way. What do you mean, specific? He divided the park into search grids, but he assigned himself and 2 other detectives to search the area where the mother said she'd last seen Emma. The rest of us were sent to search areas where she definitely hadn't been seen. Maria Santos leaned forward. That's backwards from normal search protocol. Usually you start with the last known location and work outward. Exactly, Davis agreed, but Mitchell insisted on doing it his way. And here's the thing that really bothered me at the time. While we were searching the outer areas, I saw Mitchell and the other detectives putting things into evidence bags. But when I asked what they'd found, Mitchell told me it was just trash and debris that needed to be cleared from the search area. Reynolds felt pieces of a very ugly puzzle beginning to fall into place. Did you ever see those evidence bags again? No. And when the evidence inventory was compiled the next day, there was no mention of anything being collected from Emma's last known location. The implications were staggering. If Detective Mitchell had deliberately collected evidence from the primary search area and then failed to document it properly, he might have been covering up crucial clues about what happened to Emma Chen. There's more, Davis continued. About a week after Emma disappeared, I was working a traffic stop near Riverside Park when I saw Mitchell's personal vehicle parked in the woods near the back entrance. He wasn't on duty that day, and there was no official reason for him to be there. Did you report it? Martinez asked. I mentioned it to my sergeant, but he said detectives sometimes return to crime scenes on their own time to think through cases. He told me not to worry about it. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Davis reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind patrol officers used, to jot down details that might not make it into official reports. I kept notes, he said simply. My father was a cop, and he taught me to always keep personal notes about important cases, separate from official reports. He said you never knew when those details might become important later. He opened the notebook to a page dated July 22, 2001, 1 week after Emma Chen's disappearance. I wrote down the license plate number of Mitchell's car when I saw it at the park that day. Reynolds took the notebook and copied down the license plate number, then ran it through the vehicle registration database. The results confirmed that the vehicle had indeed been registered to Samuel Mitchell in 2001. But here's what really made me suspicious, Davis continued. 2 days after I saw his car at the park, Mitchell announced he was taking vacation time to deal with a family emergency. He was gone for 2 weeks, right in the middle of a major missing child investigation. Chief Martinez felt the case taking on a life of its own, spinning beyond what anyone had expected when Buster first alerted to Sam's cane. They were no longer just dealing with evidence tampering or drug possession. They were potentially looking at a cover-up that had allowed a child's disappearance to go unsolved for over 20 years. Davis, I need you to write up everything you just told us in an official statement, Martinez said, and I want you to think carefully about any other details you might have observed but never reported. There is one more thing, Davis said hesitantly. About 6 months after Emma disappeared, I heard rumors that Mitchell had come into some money. Nothing dramatic, but he bought a new car and took his family on an expensive vacation, the kind of things that would be hard to afford on a detective's salary. Reynolds was already making notes about financial records that would need to be subpoenaed, but his mind was racing ahead to even darker possibilities. If Sam Mitchell had been paid to cover up Emma Chen's disappearance, then they weren't just looking at investigative misconduct. They might be dealing with corruption that had facilitated child abduction, or worse. The white powder from Sam's cane could be tested within hours, the documents could be analyzed for authenticity, and the financial records could be pulled with proper warrants. But the real question that hung over everything was simpler and more terrible. What had really happened to Emma Chen, and how much of the truth had been buried along with the evidence? What do you think Davis is still holding back? Drop your theories in the comments. The weight of Officer Davis's revelations hung heavy in the conference room as the investigation team processed the implications of what they'd just learned. But before anyone could fully absorb the scope of the potential cover-up, Detective Reynolds' phone rang with news from the crime lab that would change everything. The preliminary results are in on that white powder, Reynolds announced after ending the call. It's not what we expected. Chief Martinez looked up sharply. What do you mean? It's not cocaine or heroin or any street drug, Reynolds explained, his voice carrying a tone of confusion mixed with concern. The lab tech says it appears to be some kind of pharmaceutical compound, possibly a sedative or tranquilizer. They're running more detailed tests, but the initial analysis suggests it's something that would be used to incapacitate someone. The implication hit the room like a physical blow. If Sam Mitchell had been carrying sedatives in his cane along with evidence from Emma Chen's case, the potential scenarios became exponentially more sinister. How much was there? Maria Santos asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Enough to knock out a small child for several hours, Reynolds replied grimly. Maybe longer, depending on the specific compound and dosage. Officer Davis's face had gone pale as he processed this new information, alongside what he had already shared about the investigation. Jesus Christ, he whispered. All these years, I thought Mitchell might have taken money to look the other way or destroy evidence. I never imagined he might have been directly involved in what happened to Emma. Chief Martinez stood and began pacing, his mind working through the legal and procedural implications of what they were uncovering. A case that had started with a narcotics dog alerting to a retired officer's cane was rapidly becoming one of the most serious investigations the department had ever handled. We need to proceed very carefully from here, Martinez said. If we're dealing with a case involving child abduction and potential murder, every piece of evidence has to be handled perfectly. One procedural mistake could destroy any chance of getting justice for Emma Chen. But even as he spoke, Martinez knew they were already facing a nearly impossible task. 23 years had passed since Emma's disappearance. Witnesses had died or moved away, physical evidence had degraded or been lost, and the primary suspect had spent more than 2 decades covering his tracks. Detective Reynolds was already on the phone arranging for additional resources. "I'm calling in the State Police Major Crimes Unit," he told Martinez. "This is beyond what we can handle with local resources." While Reynolds made his calls, Maria Santos found herself drawn back to the locket with Emma's photograph. Something about the little girl's face continued to nag at her, as if she'd seen it somewhere recently, rather than just in old missing person reports. "Officer Davis," Maria said suddenly, "you mentioned that you saw Detective Mitchell's car at the park a week after Emma disappeared. Did you ever see him there at any other times?" Davis consulted his notebook again, flipping through pages of careful observations made over more than 2 decades of police work. "Actually, yes. I have at least 3 other dates when I spotted his personal vehicle in or near Riverside Park when he wasn't officially on duty." "When were these sightings?" "August 15th, September 3rd, and October 12th, all in 2001, all within a few months of Emma's disappearance." Reynolds finished his phone calls and rejoined the conversation. "The state police are sending a team, but they won't be here until tomorrow morning. In the meantime, we need to decide what to do about Sam Mitchell." "What do you mean?" Jenny Cross asked. "His lawyer is going to be here soon, and once that happens, our ability to get information from him becomes much more limited. We need to decide if we're going to arrest him now or continue treating this as a preliminary investigation." Chief Martinez considered the options. "What do we have that would support an arrest warrant?" "Possession of controlled substances, tampering with evidence in a criminal investigation, and obstruction of justice," Reynolds ticked off on his fingers. "That's enough to hold him while we dig deeper into the Emma Chen case." But before Martinez could make a decision, Officer Cross's radio crackled with an urgent message from the front desk. "Chief, you need to get down here immediately. Sam Mitchell's lawyer has arrived, and he's demanding to see his client and all evidence immediately." "Shit," Martinez muttered. "Reynolds, secure all the evidence from the cane. Davis, I need you to write up everything you've told us in a formal statement right now. Maria, keep Buster available in case we need him again." As the team scattered to handle their assignments, Martinez headed to the lobby to deal with Sam's attorney. He knew the next few hours would be crucial in determining whether they could build a case strong enough to finally get justice for Emma Chen. The lawyer turned out to be exactly what Martinez had expected. Expensive suit, briefcase that probably cost more than most officers made in a month, and the kind of confident demeanor that came from years of getting wealthy clients out of serious trouble. "Chief Martinez, I'm Richard Blackwood, representing Samuel Mitchell," the attorney announced, extending a hand that Martinez reluctantly shook. "I understand you're holding my client on some sort of drug possession charge related to his walking cane." "Among other things," Martinez replied carefully. "Your client was found in possession of controlled substances and evidence related to an ongoing criminal investigation." Blackwood's eyebrows raised slightly. "Ongoing investigation? I was under the impression that any investigation would be related to whatever substances were found in Mr. Mitchell's personal property." "The situation has become more complex than that," Martinez said, choosing his words carefully. "We've discovered materials that may be related to an unsolved missing persons case from 2001. And what does that have to do with my client?" Martinez decided to lay his cards on the table. "Your client was the primary investigating detective on that case. The fact that he was carrying evidence related to it in a hidden compartment raises serious questions about his conduct during the original investigation." For the first time since arriving, Blackwood's confident expression flickered slightly. Martinez could see the attorney's mind working, processing the implications of what he'd just learned. "I need to speak with my client immediately," Blackwood said, "and I'll need to review all evidence and documentation related to these allegations." "Of course," Martinez agreed. "But I should inform you that this case is now being handled jointly with the State Police Major Crimes Unit. The scope of the investigation has expanded significantly." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Are you charging Mr. Mitchell with a crime, or is he free to leave?" It was the moment of truth. Martinez could let Sam walk out with his lawyer and hope they could build a stronger case later, or he could arrest him now and risk having charges dismissed if they couldn't produce enough evidence quickly enough. "Samuel Mitchell is under arrest for possession of controlled substances, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice," Martinez said, making his decision. "He'll be processed and held pending arraignment." As Sam was formally arrested and read his rights, Detective Reynolds continued analyzing the documents found in his cane. The more he studied the photocopied evidence logs, the more discrepancies he found between what Sam had kept and what was in the official case files. "Jenny, look at this," Reynolds called Officer Cross over to his desk. "These evidence logs show that soil samples were taken from 3 different locations in Riverside Park, but the official file only mentions one location." "What were the other 2 locations?" Jenny asked, studying the photocopies. "One appears to be near the main playground where Emma was last seen, but the other one is listed as wooded area northwest of parking facility. That's not anywhere near where a 6-year-old would normally play." Jenny pulled up a map of Riverside Park on her computer and located the northwest wooded area. "That's pretty isolated. No playground equipment, no walking trails. The only reason to collect soil samples there would be if you had reason to believe something significant happened in that location." Reynolds felt his pulse quicken. "Or if you were looking for a place to hide something." The implications were chilling. If soil samples had been collected from a remote area of the park, it suggested that investigators had suspected the location might be significant to Emma's disappearance. But if those samples had never been properly processed or documented, it might mean someone had deliberately covered up crucial evidence. Meanwhile, Maria Santos had been thinking about her nagging sense of familiarity with Emma's photograph. She'd been going through her own files and case notes, trying to remember where she might have seen the little girl's face before. "Detective Reynolds," Maria called out suddenly, "I think I know why Emma's photo looked familiar to me." Reynolds looked up from the evidence logs. "Where did you see it?" "Not where, when. I think I saw a photo that looked very similar to this one about 6 months ago during a training exercise we did with missing persons cases." "What kind of training exercise?" "The state police brought in several cold cases for us to practice with. We were supposed to review the files and see if we could identify any leads that might have been missed in the original investigations." Reynolds felt his heart rate spike. "Was the Emma Chen case one of the files you reviewed?" "I don't think so, but there was a case involving a missing girl who looked very similar to Emma. Same age, same general appearance, same time frame. Do you remember any details about that case?" Maria was already pulling out her training notes. "I kept copies of all the materials from that exercise. Let me see if I can find the file." As Maria searched through her papers, Officer Davis approached with his completed statement about the original Emma Chen investigation. The document was several pages long and contained details that painted an even more disturbing picture of potential misconduct. "I remembered something else while I was writing this up," Davis said. "About 2 weeks after Emma disappeared, I was called to a domestic disturbance at an address on Maple Street. When I arrived, I found Detective Mitchell's car parked outside the house." "Was he responding to the same call?" Reynolds asked. "That's what I assumed at first, but when I went inside, Mitchell wasn't there. The homeowner said he had never seen the detective before, and there was no record of Mitchell being assigned to that call." Reynolds made a note to follow up on the Maple Street address. If Sam Mitchell had been conducting unofficial business at that location during the time he should have been investigating Emma's disappearance, it might provide crucial insights into what he'd really been doing. "There's more," Davis continued. "The domestic disturbance call turned out to be a false alarm, no evidence of any actual problem at the house. But the interesting thing was, who made the call reporting the disturbance? Who? The call came from a payphone near Riverside Park, and according to the dispatch log, it was made by a male caller who refused to identify himself. The pattern was becoming clearer, and it was deeply disturbing. Anonymous calls, unofficial visits to residential addresses, repeated trips to the park where Emma had disappeared. It all suggested a level of activity that went far beyond normal investigative procedures. Maria Santos found what she was looking for in her training files. "Here it is," she announced, holding up a case folder. "Missing person case from Fairfield County, 2001. 7-year-old girl named Jessica Martinez disappeared from a school playground on September 14, 2001. Reynolds took the file and opened it to reveal a photograph that was remarkably similar to the one in Emma's locket. Both girls had blonde hair, similar facial features, and the same innocent smile that made their disappearances all the more heartbreaking. "Were the cases ever connected?" Reynolds asked. "Not officially, but look at this. Jessica Martinez was found 3 days after she disappeared, unconscious in a wooded area about 20 miles from where she went missing. She had been drugged with some kind of sedative, but she survived. The room went silent as everyone processed the implications. A second missing child case from the same time period, involving similar circumstances and the use of sedatives. It was too much to be a coincidence. "Did Jessica remember anything about what happened to her?" Reynolds asked. Maria continued reading from the file. She was only 7, and the drugs affected her memory, but she did tell investigators that she remembered a man with a badge talking to her before everything went dark. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in a way that painted a horrifying picture. 2 similar cases involving young girls, both occurring during the same time period when Sam Mitchell was investigating Emma Chen's disappearance, both involving the use of sedatives. "We need to contact the Fairfield County Sheriff's Department immediately," Reynolds said. "If there's a connection between these cases, they need to know what we've discovered." But Chief Martinez, who had just returned from dealing with Sam's attorney, had even more pressing concerns. "The lawyer is already filing motions to suppress evidence and challenge the search of the cane. We've got maybe 24 hours before a judge starts reviewing our procedures." "What about Sam himself?" Reynolds asked. "Is he talking?" "Not a word. Blackwood has him completely shut down. But here's the thing. While I was dealing with the lawyer, I got a call from the state police. They've been reviewing cold cases involving missing children from that time period, and they think there might be more victims." The revelation hit the room like a bombshell. What had started as a simple drug possession case was rapidly expanding into what might be a serial predator investigation, spanning multiple jurisdictions and potentially dozens of victims. "How many more cases are we talking about?" Maria asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "At least 6 similar disappearances in a 3-county area between 2000 and 2003, Martinez replied. "All involving young girls, all unsolved, and several involving investigators who later transferred to other departments or took early retirement." Detective Reynolds felt the scope of the case expanding beyond anything he'd ever handled. "Chief, we're going to need a lot more resources than what we have available locally." "Already taken care of. The FBI is sending a team specializing in crimes against children. They'll be here first thing tomorrow morning." As the day wore on and more details emerged, it became clear that Sam Mitchell's cane had contained more than just evidence from one case. It might have been the key to unlocking a conspiracy that had allowed multiple child predators to operate with impunity for years. The white powder that had triggered Buster's alert was just the beginning. The real evidence would come from connecting the dots between cases that had been deliberately kept separate, witnesses whose statements had been suppressed, and victims whose stories had been buried under layers of official misconduct. But time was running out. Sam's lawyer was already working to get him released on bail, and once that happened, there was no guarantee he wouldn't disappear entirely. The evidence from his cane was secure, but the man who could explain what it all meant was slipping further out of reach with each passing hour. As evening approached, Detective Reynolds found himself staring at Emma Chen's photograph, wondering if they would finally be able to give her family the answers they'd been seeking for over 20 years. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that what they'd uncovered so far was just the tip of an iceberg that ran much deeper than anyone had imagined. The sedatives in Sam's cane suggested premeditation. The suppressed evidence suggested a cover-up. The multiple similar cases suggested a pattern of predatory behavior that had been protected by those sworn to stop it. But the most chilling possibility was one that no one wanted to voice out loud. If Sam Mitchell had been using his position as a detective to facilitate crimes against children, how many other victims were still out there? And how many other officers might have been involved in keeping their stories buried? If Sam was just one part of a larger network, who else was involved? Comment with your suspicions. The breaking point came at 11:47 p.m. when Sam Mitchell finally cracked under the weight of his own guilt and decades of buried secrets. It wasn't the interrogation techniques or the mounting evidence that broke him. It was something far more unexpected and emotionally devastating. Officer Maria Santos had been working late, reviewing case files in the conference room, when she noticed that Buster was acting strangely. The German Shepherd had been resting quietly all evening, but suddenly he began whining and pacing near the evidence table where Emma's locket still lay under the bright fluorescent lights. "What's wrong, boy?" Maria asked, approaching her partner with concern. Buster rarely showed distress after a successful detection, but tonight something was clearly bothering him. "You remember her, don't you?" Maria whispered, suddenly understanding what was happening. "You can smell her scent on this locket, even after all these years." The realization hit her like a physical blow. If Buster was reacting to Emma's scent on the locket, it meant the little girl had been in direct contact with the piece of jewelry at some point. The photograph might have been placed in the locket recently, but Emma herself had touched it, worn it, or been near it when she disappeared. Maria immediately called Detective Reynolds, who arrived within minutes despite the late hour. When he saw Buster's behavior around the locket, he understood the implications immediately. "We need to get Sam Mitchell down here right now," Reynolds said. "If Buster is detecting Emma's scent on that locket, it's not just a memento, it's evidence that Sam had direct contact with her." But when they brought Sam from his holding cell to the conference room, something unexpected happened. The moment he saw Buster lying near the locket, Sam's carefully constructed defenses completely collapsed. The retired detective stared at the German Shepherd for a long moment, then slowly sank into a chair as tears began streaming down his face. "He knows," Sam whispered. "After all these years, he still knows." "Knows what, Sam?" Reynolds asked gently, sensing that they were finally approaching the truth. "Buster was just a puppy then," Sam said, his voice breaking. "He was part of a canine training program, not even assigned to active duty yet. But he was there that day at the park, training with his handler." Maria felt her blood run cold. "Buster was at Riverside Park the day Emma disappeared?" Sam nodded, unable to meet anyone's eyes. His handler was Officer Patricia Williams. She was working with him on scent detection exercises when the call came in about the missing child. Buster found Emma's trail immediately. He was so young and eager, following scents that the older dogs might have ignored. "What did he find?" Reynolds pressed, though he suspected the answer would be devastating. "He led us straight to where she was," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not to where she'd been taken, but to where she was hiding. Emma wasn't abducted by a stranger. She was hiding from someone she knew, someone who had been hurting her." The confession came in broken pieces, interrupted by tears and long pauses as Sam struggled with emotions he'd buried for over 2 decades. The story that emerged was more tragic and complex than anyone had imagined. Emma Chen hadn't been randomly abducted from the park. She had been a victim of ongoing abuse by her mother's boyfriend, a man named Marcus Webb, who had been systematically molesting her for months. On the day she disappeared, Emma had finally tried to tell her mother what was happening, but Lisa Chen hadn't believed her. The mother thought Emma was making up stories to get attention, Sam explained. When Emma insisted that Marcus had been hurting her, Lisa got angry and sent her to her room. But Emma was terrified. She knew Marcus would hurt her even worse if he found out she'd tried to tell. So Emma had run. She'd climbed out her bedroom window and made her way to Riverside Park, where she'd hidden in the wooded area northwest of the playground. She was trying to stay hidden until she could figure out what to do, but she was only 6 years old and had no real plan beyond avoiding the man who had been hurting her. Buster found her within an hour, Sam continued. She was huddled under some fallen branches, crying and scared, but physically unharmed. Officer Williams called it in immediately, and I responded to the scene. But what happened next was where Sam's story took a dark turn. When they brought Emma back to her mother, Marcus Webb was at the house, and his reaction to seeing the police and the terrified child told Sam everything he needed to know about what had really been happening. "I could see it in his eyes," Sam said. "The panic, the calculation, the way he immediately started asking what Emma had told us. This wasn't a relieved family member. This was a predator trying to assess how much trouble he was in." Sam made a decision that night that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of following proper procedure and bringing Emma to social services for a proper investigation, he decided to handle things quietly. He thought he could protect Emma by making Marcus disappear without subjecting the little girl to the trauma of a public investigation. "I told Marcus I knew what he'd been doing, and I gave him 24 hours to leave town permanently," Sam said. "I thought I was being smart, being protective of Emma. I thought I could solve the problem without putting her through the hell of testifying in court." But Marcus Webb had no intention of leaving quietly. Instead, he panicked and made a desperate decision to eliminate the only witness who could destroy his life. "He came back that night," Sam said, his voice breaking completely. "He took Emma from her bedroom while her mother was sleeping. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late." The next part of Sam's confession revealed the full scope of his cover-up and the guilt that had been eating at him for over 20 years. When Emma's body was found 3 days later in a wooded area 20 miles from town, Sam knew that his decision to handle things quietly had directly led to her death. "I could have saved her," Sam sobbed. "If I'd followed procedure, if I'd brought her to social services that first day, she'd still be alive. But I thought I knew better. I thought I could handle it my way." Detective Reynolds felt sick as he listened to the confession, but he knew there were still crucial details missing from Sam's story. "What about the evidence in your cane, Sam? The sedatives, the case files, the locket?" Sam's explanation for these items revealed the true depth of his guilt and his desperate attempts to atone for his failures. After Emma's death, he had become obsessed with the case, keeping copies of every piece of evidence and conducting his own investigation into Marcus Webb's background. "I found out Marcus had victims before Emma," Sam said. "Other children he'd hurt in other towns. The sedatives came from his apartment when I searched it after he disappeared. He'd been using them to drug his victims so they couldn't fight back or remember clearly what happened." The locket had belonged to Emma herself. Sam had found it in Marcus's possession when he finally tracked the man down 6 months after Emma's death. By then, Marcus was living under a false name in another state, working at a daycare center where he had access to dozens of potential victims. "I confronted him," Sam said. "I told him I knew what he'd done to Emma and that I was going to make sure he never hurt another child. But Marcus just laughed at me. He said I couldn't prove anything without admitting my own role in covering up the original incident." What happened next was the darkest part of Sam's confession. Consumed by rage and guilt over Emma's death, he had done something that went far beyond police misconduct or cover-up. He had taken justice into his own hands in a way that made him no better than the predator he was pursuing. "I killed him," Sam said simply. "I shot Marcus Webb in that apartment and made it look like a drug deal gone wrong. Then I took Emma's locket and anything else that connected him to her case." The confession hit the room like a bomb. Sam Mitchell hadn't just covered up a case or tampered with evidence. He had committed murder, even if his victim had been a child predator who deserved whatever justice he received. But there was still more to the story. Sam's investigation into Marcus Webb's background had revealed connections to other predators, other cases, and other children who had been failed by a system that was supposed to protect them. Marcus wasn't working alone, Sam continued. He was part of a network of men who shared information about vulnerable children, who traded victims and covered for each other. Some of them were teachers, some were social workers, and some were police officers. Detective Reynolds felt his blood run cold. "Which police officers?" Sam looked directly at him for the first time since beginning his confession. "3 that I could identify for certain, 2 who have since died, and 1 who's still alive." "Who?" "Captain Robert Hayes from the state police. He's the one who made sure certain investigations got buried, certain evidence disappeared, certain witnesses were discredited. He's been protecting predators for over 30 years. The name hit Reynolds like a physical blow. Captain Hayes was a respected veteran who was set to retire next year with full honors. If Sam's allegations were true, one of the state's most senior law enforcement officers had been facilitating crimes against children for decades. "Do you have proof?" Reynolds asked. Sam nodded toward his cane. "The documents I kept weren't just about Emma's case. I spent 20 years building a file on Hayes and his network. Names, dates, cases that were buried, children who were silenced. It's all there." As Sam's confession continued, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. Captain Hayes had been using his position to identify vulnerable children and steer investigations away from predators in his network. He had manipulated transfers to move problematic officers out of jurisdictions where they were getting too much attention, and he had arranged for evidence to disappear and witnesses to be discredited. "Emma wasn't the only child who died because of this network," Sam said. "There were others, children whose cases were never properly investigated, whose deaths were written off as accidents or runaways. Hayes made sure those cases stayed cold. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Sam's decades-long investigation had uncovered evidence that the network was still active, still operating, still claiming victims. 6 months ago, I identified another child who fits the pattern, Sam said. A 7-year-old girl named Sophie Turner from Millfield, about 30 miles from here. She's been reported missing for 3 weeks, and guess who's been assigned to coordinate the multi-agency task force looking for her? Captain Hayes, Reynolds said, though he already knew the answer. Sophie Turner is still alive, Sam said with certainty, but if Hayes follows his usual pattern, she won't be for much longer. That's why I came here today with the cane. I was hoping someone would find the evidence and connect the dots before it's too late to save her. The confession had revealed not just the truth about Emma Chen's death, but the existence of an active conspiracy that was currently threatening another child's life. Detective Reynolds knew they had to act immediately, but they also had to be careful not to alert Captain Hayes that his network had been exposed. "Sam, where do you think they're holding Sophie Turner?" Reynolds asked. "There's a property about 15 miles north of Millfield, an old farmhouse that Hayes has used before. It's registered under a false name, but I've been watching it for weeks. I saw Hayes's personal vehicle there twice in the past month." As Sam provided detailed directions to the farmhouse, Detective Reynolds was already coordinating with Chief Martinez to organize a rescue operation. They would have to move quickly and quietly, without involving anyone who might be connected to Hayes's network. But even as they planned Sophie's rescue, Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing pieces of the puzzle. Sam's confession had answered many questions about Emma Chen's case and revealed the existence of a predator network, but it had also raised new questions about how deep the conspiracy really went and how many other victims might still be out there. The locket that had started everything, Emma's locket that Buster had recognized after all these years, now served as a symbol of both the failure to protect one child and the hope that they might still be able to save another. As the rescue team prepared to move on the farmhouse where Sophie Turner might be held, Officer Maria Santos stayed with Buster in the conference room. The German Shepherd had finally settled down, lying quietly next to the evidence table, where Emma's locket remained under the bright lights. "You did good, boy," Maria whispered to her partner. "You found the truth after all these years. Maybe now Emma can finally rest in peace." But first, they had to save Sophie Turner, and they had to make sure that Captain Hayes and anyone else involved in the network faced justice for the crimes they had committed and the children they had failed to protect. The rescue operation would begin at dawn, and by tomorrow night, they would know whether 23 years of guilt and investigation had finally led them to save a life instead of mourning another loss. Will they reach Sophie in time, or is this rescue operation walking into a trap? Share your predictions below and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this incredible true story ends.